Welcome back to Finance Friday on the ARC UK network. I am Hard Money Jim, speaking to you from beautiful Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Indian summer is upon us, and where 1 week from today, the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank will host its annual economic policy symposium. And this conference usually produces some newsworthy declarations from a bunch of academics and central bankers and economists and other various monetary mandarins about the near-term fate of our money. But I'm pretty sure these people are not going to be saying much, if anything, about money creation itself. So today we're going to step back from their concerns about the more immediate economy and talk about money from a more fundamental point of view. And to do that, we are joined today by a special guest, Clive Davis, who has created and directed a very fine documentary film on money creation and its consequences. This film is called Ex Nihilo, The Truth About Money. It's produced by the UK-based Cobden Centre for Sound Money and Social Progress. And I consider this 1 hour film to be a groundbreaking piece of work because it opens the curtain on sort of a mysterious room, a black hole that very few people understand, which is how money is created in the modern economy. So without any more delay, please meet the creator of this film, the tireless and very clever Clive Davis. He joins us today from Wales. Clive, I wonder if you would please tell us a bit about yourself, how you became affiliated with the Cobden Centre for Sound Money and Social Progress, and what is the genesis of this film you made, Ex Nihilo?
Hi, Jim. Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I have a background in broadcast for about 25 years. I took time off. I wanted to change, and I spent time re-educating myself, which is where I came across Ayn Rand very late in life. And then that led me into various other, two specific areas, actually, in terms of from those that know the philosophy of objectivism, and the definition of one way or another, we're all traders. And the fundamentals behind that is money and energy. Those two industries seemed very key to me. So I decided that's where I wanted to put my creative efforts in terms of presenting those ideas. And then how I got to meet the Cobden, got to speak to Max, who is the editor of the Cobden Centre, was kind of fun, because prior to Max, I'd caught this British politician who I didn't really know much about, called Steve Baker, delivering a series of lectures on money. And the fact that he was Austrian schooled was interesting, because in Parliament there are about 635 in the House. He's the only Austrian schooled. So I thought, well, he's interesting. So it was actually Steve that I wanted to meet first. So I managed to meet Steve, told him what I was wanting to do, and mentioned a few names, including the Cobden Centre. And it was Steve that put me in touch with Max. Max and I spoke over the phone initially, and then I eventually went down to visit Max in the Southwest. We got on very well, and it was Max that really elaborated on the money creation thing, because prior to that, I wasn't clear on that at all. I knew very little about it, and the fractional reserve was probably where I lent and accepted. But this was very interesting, and that led me to go on and discover this guy, Professor Richard Werner, read his paper, then went on to the Bank of England's website, read their paper, and Max and I were still talking, and very shortly after decided we need to make a documentary about this. And of course, there's more details involved beyond the money creation itself and the way the central banks are involved, and talking about reforms and things. So Max and I made the decision to do that. Max started, he initiated writing. He knew more about this than I did. I'm not an expert. I don't have a background in finance. Anything that I've picked up so far is self-educating and checking things all the time with people. And then through the Cobden Centre, I met some wonderful people, some of which we have in the film. Others were there to advise. So there was a lot of back and forth. And it's probably about 2 years to make it.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out 2 years. I know that you and I have been talking about this for months.
Yeah.
And this is a labor of love. I just wanted to say that you shouldn't apologize for lack of formal background, because actually not having a formal background might help you to bring a fresh, sort of a smart layman's look, which is exactly where I think we need to be on this topic.
I think so. Yeah. And also I need to add that while I was partway through this, you began your money creation pieces that you've been doing on this channel. And as soon as I saw that, I think I started bugging Razzie. Get me in touch with Jim. I need to speak to this guy.
Yeah, that's the way I remember this. This was great. And you also, I had been aware of the Cobden Centre, but Max Rangeley and Alistair MacLeod, who are very smart commentators, are very much worth reading and watching. So I want to personally endorse the Cobden Centre. Their subscription to their newsletters and so forth is free, and they're quite good. Well, thanks, Clive. So if you'll indulge me, I want to give you my 2-minute elevator pitch. I have to motivate you out there. If you're not, maybe you already are because you're on this podcast. But why do Clive and I think understanding money creation is so important? Clive mentioned the importance of energy and money. I think we take many of our critical life support systems for granted, as if they've always been there and always will be. So cheap, reliable energy is like that. And your water system is like that. You shouldn't have to know all the details of how these things are produced and get to your door, because in a complex economy, that responsibility is rightly entrusted to someone else. And we can't all be expert in everything. But just imagine if your water system, which you and I know really, I can tell you, I know very little about it. Suppose it became intermittent or faulty or contaminated. Very few things are important to life as clean water. And if your water system was under threat, you would take action to understand it, to fix it, or find someone who could, or to provide your own source of water for emergencies. If your water system was failing, obtaining that kind of knowledge would become a necessity and possibly even a matter of life and death. And so I think in a similar way, there's practically no system more important than our system of money and banking. But with obvious out-of-control government spending and inflation and currency depreciation and periodic financial panics ever present in the news, our monetary system does appear to be approaching a crisis. And that's a big problem, because sound money, that's money that's widely accepted in commerce and holds its value over time, is essential for economic progress and human well-being. Most of us take sound money for granted, but today sound money does seem to be under threat. Like anything else that's traded in the economy, money must be produced, it has to be created. So understanding money starts with understanding where money comes from, how it's created, what happens to it as it spreads throughout the economy. However, very few people understand money creation, which is why I call it the black hole in the universe of economic knowledge. Practically no one gets it. And this ignorance includes most investors, journalists, policymakers, even professional economists. I can tell you, I've served on investment committees that manage many billions of dollars. And the people on my investment committee didn't know what we're going to talk about today. And that's a fact. So Clive and I, and others, obviously, at the Cobden Centre, and Steve Baker, the MP, who you'll meet in this film, we all think it's time for the average person to understand money creation better, starting with how it comes into existence. And so that's that is the spirit in which this film was made. And so we hope you will watch the film, tell your friends about it. What is the benefit, sort of the cash value for you and people who watch it? Well, I think it's twofold. First, as a citizen, you'll be gaining a fundamental knowledge of money creation as the first step to knowing how to return to a system of sound money. And then second, as a saver and an investor, hopefully understanding money creation will help you minimize the impact of inflation on your investments, and you'll be able to, despite the best efforts of the monetary mandarins, as I call them, continue to accumulate wealth despite the dollar's declining purchasing power and the financial repression which is coming and probably already upon us. So anyway, that's my 2.5-minute elevator pitch. So without further delay, why don't we play, Daniel, the first video clip, and we'll follow that by discussion and comments from the audience.
On November the 20th, 2014, a British politician organised a debate on money creation and society in the House of Commons.
Mr. Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House has considered the subject of money creation and society. The methods of money production in society today are profoundly corrupting in ways which would matter to everyone if they were clearly understood.
Why was this significant?
I led a debate on money creation and society in Parliament. I was really proud to secure it. But the truth is, hardly any politicians could participate in that debate. Why? Because they just don't know how the system works.
This was the first time such a debate had been raised in 170 years.
So Michael Meacher, a Labour MP, very much on the left.
It is so little understood by the public that money is created every time by the banks that they make loans.
Michael Meacher and I were the only two in the Commons who seemed to really understand that money is loaned into existence by banks. So yeah, the truth is a very wide range of people don't understand the monetary system, and a remarkable number of economists.
Okay, Clive.
I'd say it's probably worth mentioning, as or reinforcing what was mentioned in there, that this, as we're about to dive into this really should be seen, and I think is, a bipartisan issue.
Very good point. I'm glad you said that. It's one of the points I wanted to make. This really is a bipartisan issue. And even if you think the government should have a role in money creation, understanding how it is created is critical, both to understanding what government would then appropriately, under that view, do. And it's also important for those of us who disagree with that to be able to have the common ground to push back and debate them. So that's a very good point. Another interesting aspect, I thought, did you notice how empty the room in Parliament was?
I got a little insight on that, actually.
Yeah, what's that about?
The insight, it just so happened to be there was a by-election going on that day. So consequently, you sometimes get a lesser attendance when things like that. It wasn't that people just were too frightened to be there, but those that were there, there were other people that asked questions, but the only two that really understood it, as the clip points out, was Stephen Sadly, the now deceased Michael Nietzsche, they were the only two that really got it. He's on
Yeah.
the Labour Party, and for those that don't know the UK, that would be the sort of what we'd call the left-leaning, and Steve would be a conservative, although I don't know how he'd like to describe himself. I think of him, I suppose, as a classical liberal, as opposed to certainly, well, like today's conservatives.
Well, I would describe, frankly, don't call me a fanboy if you want. I would describe him as a hero. There's no one in the USA that I'm aware of, with a possible exception sometimes of Rand Paul,
Yeah.
who is taking on this issue and trying to help the public understand it. It was interesting. This was the first debate on money creation in 170 years, 1843 or 4. Well, 1844 was the date of the Bank Charter Act that gave the Bank of England sole authority to issue banknotes. And it made the Bank of England a private shareholder-owned company, but was also a chartered monopoly under the Crown. And it set many important precedents for modern banking, the Act did, but not a debate since.
No.
Not a debate since that ancient act.
Yeah.
I find that extraordinary, don't you, Clive?
I do, and it's something that I want to explore beyond this documentary, is the history of money creation. We've had a few chats ourselves about how far back this goes, because it's not some people may think this is a recent event, or they may think it's since we came off the gold standard or something like this, but it does go back a very, very long way. But I would like to know the details about how it's expanded in terms of government policy, how it's been abused to the extent that it has. But yeah, this goes back a long way.
Yeah, so I could just give a brief plug for my upcoming course. I don't go into the history of the English banking system. I go into it briefly, the progression and development of the American banking and money creation system in the 19th century, which is important to understand, where we are today. But it's a very rich and detailed history on both sides. Many of the ideas in the United States banking system, the basic ideas came from England.
Yes.
But not all. So it's a very. Let's see what we have on the chat here. Chris says, Christopher Smith says, money's a symbol of free exchange amongst men. Yes, I agree, as long as it is money that comes from men and not from the market. He says it holds the essence of human morality, and not only is in its basis of free exchange, but in material wealth and productive activity. And Bonnie, thank you for your pledge. And Christopher adds, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, that's kind of true. That's the man behind the black hole. Okay, so Daniel, what if we queue up the next, I believe it's clip number 2. Cue that up, please.
Understanding how money is created is an essential first step to fixing our monetary system.
I believe the economic education is lacking in the UK and US and globally, and most people have no idea how money is made. Even finance managers, bankers, as well as finance journalists as well. It's a crazy situation because there's just such a poor understanding of how money is made.
So as things stand today, just about every economics textbook used in both undergraduate and postgraduate courses teaches that when banks make loans, what they're doing is lending out money. They're lending out depositors' money. Of course, this is in fact not the case. When a bank makes a loan, it creates that money out of thin air.
William White was head of the monetary department at the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks.
when I heard that this is what the textbooks were saying, I was frankly surprised, because that was not the way we at the central bank thought about the money creation process at all.
Most money that actually exists today in countries like Britain or America, most of it is actually lent into existence by those people who hold that magic card, a bank license.
I don't think a lot of people working in the banking system have any idea really where this money comes from.
Banks creating money when they make loans is further confirmed by the Bank of England on their own website, citing publications from the bank's Monetary Analysis Directorate.
There you go.
All right. I think the most, I don't know if it's frightening, but the most concerning thing there. What did Max say? And what have I confirmed in my survey of textbooks? What did Richard Warner in his paper, A Lost Century in Economics, confirm in a thorough review of economics textbooks and the literature on money creation? They're all practically wrong. They're practically all wrong. Right back here on my shelf, I have the three leading ones. I have the Samuelson one, I have one by Cicchetti, and one by a professor named Brandel. They either ignore the money creation issue altogether, or they use a convoluted, incorrect description of a fractional reserve system. That came mostly from Samuelson.
Actually, I had at an earlier cut in the film, I had a piece on Samuelson, Werner as well, actually. But in terms of length, I cut that down, which is a shame. But we've got the Bank of England there. But yes, his book is still being taught today.
It is.
Revisions, but it's still in most universities.
The 1995 edition of Samuelson changed its wording a little bit, but it still teaches the basic idea that no single bank can create money. Only a network of banks can create money. And it basically gets the accounting of money creation wrong. It just gets it wrong. And so think about this. Our knowledge, our designated experts are mostly incorrect about this. And I saw this when I was as a financial professional. People don't understand this. They think a bank is the same thing as a financial intermediary that just takes in savings and lends those savings out. It's not at all what happens. And so we have a broken knowledge system here. What could be worse for if the people, us, are going to try to reform a system? If we don't know what we're talking about, we are helpless against these people who, impose various monetary measures upon us. So
would you agree, Jim, that people in the past, going back some way, had a better understanding than they do today? And I bring that up because I read the Lincoln Douglas papers. And you, besides everything else that's going on, you do get a sense that the average man would be, vying for candidacy for presidency. The average man would say, "Well, where's the money going to come from?" So they were very sort of focused on that. And what I still don't understand is when people like Samuelson have come along, I still don't know where's the academic pushback. Certainly, as his first papers were being published, there appears to have been silence. I would imagine that at the beginning, there ought to have been some sort of academic pushback, and it seems that there wasn't.
there was some when you read the history, which I have delved into.
Thank you.
And based on my reading, it looks like the famous economist Irving Fisher was the last great holdout among sort of mainstream economists for understanding that money is created by, ex nihilo, as we say in banks. But this was gradually supplanted by this fractional reserve theory, which was itself then supplanted by this financial intermediation theory, which doesn't even account for money creation, really. It really ignores it altogether. It's truly lost knowledge. I have a hard time accounting for it other than to see the creeping loss of knowledge historically. A couple of other observations which I want to explore more. Okay. It seemed to be lost just about the time, or to lose sway in a big way, just about the time the U.S. went off the gold standard around 1933. It seemed to die with the gold standard. Not exactly clear on why that should be, but I'm going to try to investigate that down the road.
Thanks for the mention of the Irving Fisher. I'll look into that.
Yeah. Also, Richard Werner's essays document this quite well, and that'll give you a good clue to go, I think, follow that thread. The other thing I think is interesting is that those who really seem to understand money creation today, they're almost all out of the UK, and then some from the continent. There's a couple of central bankers who write about it. For example, the head of the Swiss Central Bank, Thomas Jordan, wrote an excellent paper, which I use in my course. But there are very few economists in the USA, even the Austrians in the USA, who really seem to get this. We have a long way to go in the USA, but I think my view is the best intellectuals are on this topic are in the UK, and therefore that is where, if we get reform from the intellectuals, this is where it's likely to come from. There's becoming a much more rich literature in the UK, and so this is my hope that the Cobden Centre is going to tap into knowledge. Not that they will agree with the political points of view of many people who understand it, but they'll tap into it. Interestingly, one more observation. I shouldn't yak on and on. I find the left wing or socialist oriented or Keynesian oriented, neo-Keynesian economists typically understand this better than the free market economists, which is just terrible irony. You have to understand how different Steve Baker is. He is one of a kind, as far as I can tell. He's one of a kind among politicians.
Yeah, there might be another couple. I think perhaps it might be. I haven't listened to too much in terms of the money creation, but I think people like Douglas Carswell is an interesting guy as well, worth listening to. But certainly, no, I absolutely agree. And I cannot account for your observation about the UK, other than the fact that I do listen. I don't know where they broadcast audio Mrs. Wire podcasts from, but I'm continuously listening to that and hearing about fractional reserve banking. And that's, they're Austrian scholars. I think they're from the States, but I'm not. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure where they're from.
I think they mostly are. All right. So my purpose here is not to, excoriate or criticize anyone. I'm just making my own observations about where the knowledge seems to reside today. Yeah. Okay. Daniel, would you see who we have here?
You want to go to the Cantillon effect? Clip 4, I think we have on.
Yeah, let's go to. I was going to see if we had anything on the super chat, but
right. Yeah, absolutely.
So Free Trade says, should fractional reserve banking be legal under rights protecting law? If not, in what way does it infringe on rights? Okay, I think I understand the meaning of your question. I think you're saying, should banks be allowed to create money, this kind of fiduciary media in this way, the way we're describing, should that be legal? Okay, I think that is a big question. My own view is that as long as it is based on free banking with no government interference, there's nothing wrong with it and nothing that you should do to stop it, because a free banking system will based on gold, will self-regulate money issuance and will not allow it to happen. In fact, my belief is that creating credits like this that function as money would be very limited. It would exist. This is my supposition. In a free market, it would exist, but it would be very limited for a variety of reasons. The most important of which is that people would learn how to read a bank balance sheet, just like they know how to play a video game today or drive a car. And they would know that if they put their gold in a bank, whether it's going to be put at risk or not by, people issuing credits to pay it out that exceeded the actual amount of gold in the bank. And if they didn't like that, they could just choose a bank for safekeeping, a fully reserved bank. But that is actually not allowed to exist today. So yes, I think it should be allowed in a free market.
I would just add to that, just to stress that it's not so much the bank activity as things stand, it's the interventionism. And as you say, and if we had competition in currency as well, creating money, but being responsible, and you fail if you don't. But it's the intervention that skewers everything and distorts everything. So intervention.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's good to remember that the gold standard rose out of competition, natural competition from all kinds of commodities that were vying to become money. And gold worldwide over many hundreds of years became the universal money. So maybe if we reinstituted free markets, it would be something else, but I'd love to try and see. So let's go on to the Cantillon effect. Daniel, you cue up video number 3.
The inequity that results from money printing is something that nowadays we know as the Cantillon effect. And this was Richard Cantillon who, before he became a banker in Paris, he became involved in the supply chain for the British Army in the War of the Spanish Succession. And this was in the very early 1700s. And he noticed the effect of price differentials from wealth differentials, and how people who had the money and spent it got the best prices in the market, as it were. The people who got the worst prices were the people who received it last. If you receive this money last, you have already found that prices have risen, and if you don't receive it, like you're a pensioner or a worker on a low wage, then you suffer monetary inflation.
So if you're creating money and pumping it into housing, we shouldn't be surprised that young people are stuck with the injustice that not only are houses unaffordable for them today, that unaffordability seems to be getting worse for them, because as they save the deposit, they just find the house that they were aiming to buy has just accelerated away from them.
But it's not just housing where prices are distorted.
Okay, so we stopped that clip there because we thought we didn't want to get totally into the weeds with Cantillon, but it's a very important concept and critical to understand both good money creation and bad money creation. Clive, you I believe were emphasizing the Cantillon effect to me, and why do you consider it so important?
Well, it certainly, we hear all sorts of reasons why sort of asset classes are going up, and for most people, and particularly younger generation, there'd be, I think a lot of them have given up on the idea of owning a home. So that's one asset class. There are other asset classes, but there is a few false bits of information, I would say, outrightly, as to why and people are blaming immigration, and I mean, yeah, there is to some extent, and that they're blaming that. They're also blaming, and I'm saying it's not that. There is housing policies, government policies, not building enough homes, that will have an effect. But I think nothing comes close to the Cantillon effect as an explanation of what drives up asset prices. And you've got all this money being pumped straight into financial institutions. You've got more money, so you've got a debasement in currency. If anyone is a wealth management will say, well, you don't want to hold on to cash. Let's put it somewhere. So you're always looking for the next asset class, driving up the prices. And this is a far better explanation as to, for the regular folk, as to why are these prices going up? Why can I never afford?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. This gentleman, Cantillon, is, in my view, an underappreciated economist, and it's, I think, failure to understand this effect is one of the reasons many bankers, even central bankers, don't seem to understand, or they don't appear to understand asset price bubbles and inflations. The Cantillon effect rose out of the quantity theory of money, which goes all the way back to Nicholas Copernicus in the 1500s, before there were even any economists. And this naive or mechanical quantity theory of money was that the general price level is proportional to the amount of money, the total amount of money that's in the economy. So in other words, if the quantity of money doubles, then prices are supposedly going to double. Now, no one has ever actually observed that, so that should give you pause right there. But Cantillon very inductively did observe what happened, as Alistair MacLeod said, when he was operating as a go-between during the war. So Cantillon's unique contribution to the general quantity theory, that is the idea that the relationship between quantity of money and prices in aggregate is not mechanical, he understood that an increase in the quantity of money does raise prices, but not at the same time or to the same extent. And that the first person who gets the money has the pricing advantage. The person who doesn't get the money has no advantage. And everyone in between, as the money changes hands, gets a lesser and lesser advantage.
Exactly.
And he put it in a very interesting analogy, which I'm going to read, which is really, I think, helps me to visualize money flowing through an economy. He likens it to a river floating along its bed. Here's what he says. The river, which runs and winds about in its bed, will not flow with double the speed when the amount of water is doubled. So you can imagine a dam, and the water that's flowing over the dam is doubled, but the river flow, the velocity, it's not doubled. You can imagine the water finding new little rivulets, getting soaked into little different pieces of sand and around trees and so forth. That's the complexity of the economy, so that no one can really predict, when you inject money at large in the economy, exactly where it will go. But one thing we do know is that the first person who gets the money gets the advantage.
Yes.
So when the Fed undertakes quantitative easing and purchases treasury bonds from investors, and they give them, instead of a bond, they give them new money, that investor has new money to spend. And what is that investor going to do? He's going to do what investors do. He's going to invest the money. And you do this with trillions of dollars over several years, you are going to bid up the price of investments, stocks, bonds, real estate, which is exactly what happened.
New money at that current market rate at that point.
Yes.
which will change as soon as he's spent it.
I would just say further that the misunderstanding of this quantity theory and the Cantillon effect has caused the Fed's economists to abandon quantity altogether. They now think, because the link between quantity of money and general prices seems much less empirically close than it was, say, in decades through the 80s or 90s. Since 2000, it doesn't seem very close. They don't even consider asset prices bubbles and inflation. The only thing they think is inflation is consumer prices, okay? So they have abandoned thinking about the quantity of money because they believe in this straw man called this, or to some extent they believe in this naive quantity theory. And they say, well, that can't be true. But that's not what, as I said, no one's ever observed that, and no thinking person has ever claimed that quantities of money affect prices that way. But Cantillon's insight gives you a very interesting, gives you a very keen sense of, how money does raise prices in specific markets based on the specific people it goes to. Okay.
Yeah.
So the understanding of this is, and thinking about it, I think is very critical to understanding. So we talk about money creation and its consequences. This is critical to understand the consequences. All right.
It does also seem that there is cognition among certainly some central bankers in terms of the money creation. I can't remember if we have it in our clips and that, but speaking to Bill White, former OECD and various other, he was at the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, which is, as we've described him, as a central bank of central banks. But he says he was quite surprised in terms of how money creation was being taught from his perspective and the people he was around. The money creation process was understood. Now, it's probably not understood among politicians, but at least some central bankers understand it. But there seems to be a gap between central bankers and banking.
Yes.
Why that is, I couldn't say.
On the comments we have, let's see here. Let's see. Rand is radical. No Fed, free banking. Let's see, Christopher Smith. Let's see, there's a comment here I saw. Oh yeah, George Reisman, he says, disagrees with fractional reserve. I think that's true, although I would be a little careful. In his magnum opus, turn to page 514 for an extended discussion of this. Reisman presents both sides of this issue quite well, so he understands it. Then later, along page about 900 or so, he makes the case for a 100% gold reserve bank. He's making his case. He has also said in a number of speeches that he does not think what you're calling fractional reserve banking, that extending credits that are used as money that exceed the amount of gold in the bank, he has said that it should not be outlawed. And he agrees with von Mises that if it were not outlawed, that it would practically not exist. So be careful to say, if you say that Reisman just dismisses it. He understands the issue, he has a position, but he wouldn't, and he thinks it's what he calls it is tantamount to fraud, but he would not outlaw it. Now, Murray Rothbard, who wrote an excellent book called The Mystery of Banking, excellent in the sense that it's clear and that it describes quite well where money comes from. He is adamant. He thinks it's absolutely fraudulent and doesn't, as far as I remember, even address the issue, the fact that if people agree that this is what they want to do, and that what happens to the money is to your gold is fully disclosed, and you always have the choice to put it in the bank or take it out of the bank. he doesn't even address the fact that if people want to put their gold at risk that way, why should they not be allowed to? Rothbard has a good understanding, but a very, I would say, kind of a dogmatic view on that. So good observation, Chris. Keep digging as you go through this, okay? All right. Okay, now I'm not going to argue with you too much, Chris. If you want to take it up offline, he says if it's fraud, he thinks it ought to be illegal. That is not what Reisman says. You can look up his speeches on Mises.org, and he says he thinks it's tantamount to fraud. Okay, he thinks it's what's the word he used? He thinks it's chicanery or some word like that, something similar to that, but should not be illegal. It's almost as if he thinks it's a vice that should not be outlawed. Okay, that's my combination. That's my analysis. Okay, let us go to clip 4. How are we doing on time? We're okay. We got
clip 7, I think, is clip 4 was the Cantillon effect. So
yes.
Clip 7 is the perils of not understanding.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
So clip 7. Thanks, Daniel.
The main problem with zero interest rates and money printing, quantitative easing, as they call it, it doesn't work. They believe that printing money supports economic growth. There's no evidence for that in economic history. There's no correlation whatsoever over long periods of time between money growth and economic growth. What it does produce in the long term is inflation. There's a very, very high correlation in the long term between money printing, between money growth and inflation.
So you get this enormous accelerating rush to destruction. And Hayek told us all about it in his Nobel Prize lecture. If you build jobs on an accelerating increase in the money supply, those jobs are only viable all the time the money supply keeps accelerating, all the time it's increasing. So of course you get a boom and a bust. Where is the justice in getting people into professions and jobs which are only sustained by this enormous accelerating increase in the money supply?
In my monthly writings for the Irish institution across continental Europe, I've analysed every single policy response of the European Central Bank and financial authorities in the course of the last 10, 11 years. And really, I think the authorities know themselves they've reached the end of the road. All policies now resolve to money printing. I think the prevalence of money printing has now made the situation basically unfixable. We have a situation where the ECB and the Euro financial authorities completely control the banking system. Financial markets have been replaced by the printing press, and in fact the ECB is operating in a manner more or less akin to the Soviet-era monobank.
I thought the closing comment about the Soviet-era monobank was chilling. Clive, who was that gentleman?
Gordon Kerr. Gordon Kerr. Lovely chap. Yeah.
Irish investor, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think what's particularly chilling about that is I mean, I agree with you on that comment as well, the Soviet-era monobank, but just to try to get your head around the fact that there are so many jobs out there that are dependent, have become dependent, or even exist at all through artificial cheap money, and by default, there's a whole load of jobs out there that simply don't exist because we don't have an honest monetary system. So there is a lot to clean up, and it's going to hurt.
Yeah, and my guess is that the creative destruction required to do it cannot happen unless the monetary authorities stop expanding. There's too many companies that will just be kept on life support and soaking up valuable labor and capital to less than optimally productive employments. And we're never going to get back to strong economic growth.
Well, that or a major crisis bigger than we've had.
Right. And I agree. And I'm suggesting that we might have to have a major crisis in order to wake up the world. At least we're going to have some pain. I think that has to be. And I'm not trying to be Cassandra or doom and gloom, but
no, I mean that's the. I mean, I think that hopefully one of the messages in this film is for people to. It's in their interest, which we'll discuss, to self-educate, because if we go further down this line and we go back to the same old, lowering interest rates and pushing more money into the system, just to push it further down the road. I think if people could start to learn what the effects of that is going to be, a short-term gain for a long-term pain, they may reject it if they understand it.
So Free Trade, who just pledged 50 Swedish kroner, I think that's what that is. He says, the Fed's idea that cooling down the economy slows down inflation seems almost exactly opposed to reality. Economy being the production of goods. Thoughts? Yeah, Free Trade, you're on it. That's right. Von Mises has a great passage in one of his speeches where he likens he talks about how inflation causes, the analogy he uses is an automobile, due to inflationary policies, runs over a pedestrian. And the fix of raising interest rates and clamping down on production is the equivalent of backing up over that fallen passenger to try to correct the accident.
It's a cartoon.
Which is a beautiful analogy and a beautiful cartoon. Yes, you kill the economy. It's so contradictory. You kill the economy in order to allegedly save it. They don't understand, they don't appreciate that economic progress comes from production, not consumption. So they try to kill consumption and dampen down the whole thing. It's
the inverse of what should be. Yeah.
They should just let money and interest rates find their level based on market conditions and not inject money and jigger with interest rates. Interest rates, of course, are a universal price. Interest rates affect everything, along with the quantity of money. That's the universal price is the term I got from James Grant, great financial journalist.
This may be the show for it, because we had a brief interlude with Liz Truss, and at least she understood the idea that we needed economic growth. We needed production, and she wanted that. So, I mean, I don't know too much about the current candidate for the Argentinian elections. Was it Javier Milei? Is it something like that? So
the guy who wants to dollarize the economy.
It's going to be interesting just to keep an eye on what goes on there as well. So I'm watching. We'll see, but at least to have some people out there understanding that things need to be produced and people need to be free to produce them.
Yep.
And that comes first.
And money creation by government distorts that production in ways that it's very hard to see, very hard to measure. You can see a lot of the bad effects, but it's impossible to know where they all are.
I think it's also important for people to understand that when you free up production and people create things, that is the creation of wealth. It's not a numerical value of dollars or pounds or whatever. That's a yardstick, a measuring stick. So this idea, which you tend to hear from time to time, they talk about what was trickle down effect. It's not trickle down, it's pushing up. It's value being created from nothing. And that is ideas put into action, offered out. Some people buy, some people don't buy, but it's wealth creation that should not be inhibited. And that's endless.
Yes, there's no upper limit on the amount of wealth that can be created, because human wants and needs are ultimately insatiable. They're open-ended.
I think there's a lot of people out there that haven't fully grasped that. They need to understand that there isn't, it's the old thing. There's not a pot. There's not a pot that we have to sort of take from. It's unlimited.
I'll just give you a quick one. I think it's a great analogy. Riesman has a great analogy. He says, if a person has a car, they want two cars. If they have two cars, they want two cars and a boat. If they have two cars and a boat, he wants two cars and a yacht. If he has two cars and a yacht, he wants a yacht on which he can land his airplane. There's no limit to the aspirations of human
so forth and so forth. And the universe is infinite. So
okay. Thanks for all your comments. Let's go to the next clip, please.
We have to convince people that inflation exists for one reason alone, which is that there is too much money in the system.
Governments keep growing, which means that governments are constantly looking for more money. Now, one way that they can get more money is to raise it through taxation. But they've reached, or are very close to, saturation point. There is a point at which people just will not put up with any more tax. And so how else can they get the revenue that they want? Well, the easiest way is through inflation. Inflation is a kind of sneaky tax, because what it does is to devalue the government's debt at the expense of savers. It's a way of transferring money from the private saver to the state. But unlike income tax, voters don't necessarily blame the government for the inflation. It can be much more plausibly presented as some kind of natural force, like a bad weather event. And therefore, politicians are always going to prefer the money printing to the direct taxation.
So the way to improve the system is to reduce government involvement in the system, to reduce government involvement in the world of finance. And this is not going to be simple, this is not going to be fast, but what we need to do is to start getting government out of the business of banking, out of the business of finance, start slowly liberating the financial sector.
Yeah, Daniel Hannan there, very articulate.
Great guy.
Yeah, oh man.
Good.
So he made a great, Margaret Thatcher famously said that the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And I think when she said that, she probably had taxation in mind when she spoke about other people's money, because as Mr. Hannan pointed out, people see taxes directly. It's very visible, directly painful, and they rebel against paying taxes beyond a certain point. When the tax is disguised as inflation or debasement of the currency, whatever you want to call it, they're much less likely to notice. So, as he pointed out, politicians hungry for money turn to various mechanisms to take more middle-class wealth by means of inflation. And I just want to say that in my course, in lessons 6 and 7, I'm going to cover exactly how politicians do that and exactly the kinds of things they're doing now and are likely to do in order to confiscate real wealth and therefore be able to redistribute it to keep their promises without you knowing that your pocket's been picked.
It's also, they don't know that it's due to all of this artificial cheap money. And what tends to happen, and I think I might attribute this quote to Daniel, actually, because people start blaming all these corporations. Sorry, Daniel Hannan, Lord Hannan. I think that's the person that said that this particular thing I'm about to say. People start blaming greedy corporations. And I think it was Daniel Hannan, that said, and it may have been somebody else, I'm not sure, that said it's all very well that people start blaming corporations when the prices are going up, but you never hear them turn around and when the prices come down from corporations say, oh, aren't they generous?
Right.
It's only one way. Prices go up, they're greedy. Prices come down, nothing.
Right.
Was it Friedman who said that socialism is when A and B get together and tell C what to give to D?
Yeah, or another analogy is when two wolves and a sheep vote on what they're going to have for lunch.
Yes. There's a society in the UK, it's a very, very old society. I can't remember what year it began, called the Fabian Society.
Yeah.
Their actual emblem, they have a shield. Their emblem is, I think they've only in the last couple of years changed it. But for a very, very long time, for all their history, it is a wolf wearing a sheep.
Oh, interesting.
They're very, very open about that. But sorry, I digress. But yes, it's the vested interest that we've just looked at. And there are a lot of people who have a vested interest. And as he said, that they just want to push the problem down to the next administration.
All right, so we're about at the end of our time here. I think we can go a little over. So let's play our last clip, Daniel, which is it's in your own interest to educate yourself.
It's always the line of least resistance for a politician to keep the party going rather than face the consequences. In other words, to inflate the bubble and hope that it blows up on some successor administration rather than have to take unpopular decisions himself.
One way or another, when this super bubble of debt goes wrong and obligations goes wrong, we're going to need an educated public who elect the right politicians who are willing to be honest about the troubles that we face and how we're going to get through them.
When enough people are no longer benefiting, when they're being disenfranchised from this system, then that will have, I think, consequences in the political sphere.
Okay.
I think that video speaks for itself so well. Steve Baker is making the pitch as a politician, a caring politician. Be ready. When the system is ripe for reform, we need people who can select the right repair people, the right fixers. I would add, and I'll then turn it over to you, Clive. I would add that you also have a more personal reason, and I'm going to cover this in my course on money creation. You can do a lot, even before we fix the system and restore sound money. You can do a lot to protect your savings and to invest profitably without, being victim to the some of the inflationary and repressive prospects that we are going to face. So I just want to give out a little plug here, a shameless self-promoting plug. I'm going to start this course on September 16th. That's a Saturday. It'll be a weekly course of 1 to 1.5 hours each. It'll go 9 sessions. The title of the course is The Black Hole of Economics, Money Creation and Its Consequences. I will cover money creation, its history, good money creation and bad money creation, how government increasingly abuses the money creation process, and what you can do about it to protect your savings and investments. My aim is to make this the most practical finance course you will ever take. So I'll need to skip one session on September 30th due to a prior commitment, but other than that, it will go 9 consecutive Saturdays, September 16 to November 18. And eventually, I hope and I plan to turn the course into a book, each lesson corresponding to a chapter. So, Clive,
Yeah, I was going to say three things. I mean, firstly, please go and watch the film. Watch all the way past the credits. That's an interesting comment at the end as well. But also the websites at the end. Go to the Cobden Centre's website, www.cobdencentre.org. They have regular articles in there, and also please, if you find what they do of value, please donate to them as well. This is the first film that they've done, and they've asked me to do it, and that was fantastic. I hope there'll be more things to come on that score. They do a lot of great work, so please donate. Also, if you want to reach me, I think for now, use my Cobden Centre address, which is clive@cobdencentre.org. And if it's not related to the film and it's not related to the monetary system, I can always sort of then pass on through that email another email that I have, which I won't do for now. There's one final thing I wanted to mention. There's a group that's been set up, which have taken a particular interest in the film, called the Honest Money Initiative. I'm sorry I didn't have that for you to hand for the description, but hopefully if I say it again, you'll remember Honest Money Initiative. If you Google that, they have a website. They are also pushing the film, and I think they're going to try to do what they can to push reform to our monetary system. So the Cobden Centre and the Honest Money Initiative are worthy of your time to have a look into as well.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Clive. Yeah, that's great to know. And so I'm for them. I mean, let the sound and honest money restoration project begin. And I think your film, Clive, might just be the thing that kicked it off. Wouldn't you like to think that?
I'd love to think that. I'd love to think there's a conversation going. And if you do go, when you go and watch the film on the Cobden Centre's YouTube channel, please fill the comments in. Where I can, I'll reply, or somebody will reply. And also a big thank you to Max Rangeley and Geoff Blanning, who are my producers of this as well, who've given me a lot of support too.
All right, good. In closing, I want to thank the irreplaceable Daniel Kraus for helping us set this up and engineer it. This is a little bit more intricate than what we normally do, but it looked like it went really smooth from my angle, Daniel. So thank you very much.
And thanks for the Ayn Rand Centre UK as well for
right.
bringing
All right.
it.
So
Yeah.
cheerio, everyone. Look on the
Thanks, Jim.
the doc. You can see the Cobden Centre site and the Honest Money Initiative site, and sign up for the course there too. And so thanks everybody, and we will see you next time. I hope not too long from now on Hard Money Jim. Bye-bye.